Hi guys, today I'd like to just jump into my shadowing project without showing you the original content because I thought for some people showing the original content only without my shadowing voices could be seen as a pure plagiarism. I don't like that, so I changed it the way I shoot this video. And today's project I would like to work on, it's one of the episodes of Culips English podcast, which is my favorite English learning podcast channel. And the episode today is about the interview with Lindie who is famous YouTuber with lots of subscribers and also famous for being polyglot, being a polyglot, which means she can speak multiple languages, more than four. So she is the woman on the right side of the screen. So today they are talking about the tips she can share with language learning listeners. So I thought many of you can feel interested what they are talking about. So let's go for it.
So, I want to get into language learning a bit more.
So I want to get into language learning a bit more.
And now, when you're studying all these different languages,
Now, when you are studying all these different languages,
it must take up a lot of your time,
must take up a lot of your time.
and you must develop a lot of good study techniques, I think.
You must develop a lot of good study techniques, I think.
Some sort of shortcuts or some hacks
Some sort of shortcuts or some hacks
that work for you from, learning one language you can apply
that work for you from, language one learning one language you can apply
to the next time you start a new language.
to the next time you start a new language.
And that's what I really wanted to talk about today.
That's what I really wanted to talk about today.
I was hoping that you could share some of your study tips with our
I was hoping that you could share some of your study tips with our listeners.
listeners.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
First of all, I think it's very important to have a language learning community around you.
First of all, I think it's very important to have a language learning community around you.
So I've learned a lot of my tips from my friends who are
So I've learned a lot of my tips from my friends
also language learners.
who are also language learners.
And by watching how other polyglots do it.
And just by watching how other polyglots do it,
A good friend of mine, Alex Rawlings,
a good friend of mine, Alex Rawlings,
he's a British polyglot
is a British polyglot
who also speaks Afrikaans,
who also speaks Afrikaans,
and he also wrote a book. So I
and he also wrote a book. So
would perhaps read books that polyglots have wrote
I wouldn't read books that polyglots wrote
about
about
language learning and use those tips.
language learning and use those tips.
But indeed, over the years,
But indeed, over the years,
I've developed some tips that work for me.
I've developed some tips that work for me.
And it's
Okay.
important to remember that
It's important to remember that
everybody has a different study style.
everybody has a different study style.
So what works for me may
So what works for me may
not work for somebody else, and vice
not work for somebody else, and vice versa.
versa.
Right. Sure, sure.
So I'll just talk about my main
So I will just talk about my main tips.
tips.
Okay.
Mostly when learning a
Mostly when I learn a language,
language, it's very important to immerse yourself
it's very important to immerse yourself
in the language fully.
in the language fully.
So what
Hmm.
I like to try to do
So what I like to do
is to do everything that I normally do
is to do everything that I normally do
in my native language to
in my
try
native
and do that
language,
in a different language.
to try to do that in a different language.
Okay.
If I'm writing a shopping list to buy
If I'm writing a shopping list to buy
groceries, I will
groceries,
try and write that in Korean, for
I will write and I will try and write that in Korean, for example.
example. If I'm
Ooh.
listening to music on the bus, I
If I'm trying to mute, if I'm listening to music on the bus,
should listen to Korean music.
I should listen to Korean music.
If I'm watching
Mhm.
TV, I should watch
If I'm watching TV, I should watch
Korean TV.
Korean TV.
That
Mhm.
way, you are constantly
That way, you're constantly
learning the language
learning the language
and you're getting used to native pronunciation
and you're getting used to native pronunciation
and grammar and how things sound.
and grammar and how things sound.
It's
Sure.
also important to remember
It's also important to
how
remember
babies learn a language.
how babies learn a language.
A
Mhm.
mother doesn't give her baby a textbook,
A mother doesn't give her baby a textbook, right?
right? They
No,
just
of course not. No.
from hearing and repeating and
They are hearing and repeating.
from
Right.
context. If your mom points at a cup and says cup,
If your mom points at a cup and says cup,
and then she picks up another cup and
and then she picks up another cup and
says cup, you are going to learn
says a cup,
without her giving you a book
you're going to learn without her giving you a book.
that the thing that looks like this is a cup.
The thing that looks like this is a cup.
So I've had very successful language lessons with teachers
So I've had very successful language lessons with teachers
where they only speak the language they are teaching me.
where they are only speak the language they are teaching me.
So
Mm.
I'm currently learning Spanish online,
So I'm currently learning Spanish online,
and
Okay.
my tutors never speak English in the lessons.
and tutors never speak English in the lessons.
That's very
Okay.
important because it forces me
That's very important because it forces me to
to try and think in the language.
try and think in the language.
So
Right.
that's something else you can do.
So that's something else you can do.
But if you are self studying,
But if you're self studying,
it
Mhm.
might be difficult to try and create an environment that is only
it might be difficult to try and create an environment that is
in your target language.
only in your target language. So, what were the tips she has given us. The first one was to have a language learning community around you. And I think I definitely have one. Our amazing ISTM and Toastmasters clubs. And the second, to immerse yourself in the target language you're learning. And for this one, I have sufficient room to improve myself. So I decided to keep a daily journal in English, with both types. No, with either type of mm, audio sounds and text types. So I hope this content can give you some inspiration to fasten your language learning progress. So that's all for today. Bye.